Now available in paperback and Kindle Unlimited, Isis, Imitation of Life. The Goddess Next Door helps a young black girl overcome racism during the era of Jim Crow in this Golden Age Isis series adventure. Get Isis, Imitation of Life in paperback and Kindle Unlimited today. The definition of insanity is doing the exact same thing and expecting a different result. And it's clear to me that C.B. Cebulski and Sana Amanat are clearly insane because they are getting ready to relaunch the Ms. Marvel title for the 5th time in 2019. Now, for this 5th volume of Ms. Marvel, they have decided that G. Willow Wilson won't be writing the adventures of Kamala Kahn. Instead, they are choosing to hire Saladin Ahmed, the former writer of Black Bolt and Exiles, to go out here and pen the adventures of Kamala Kahn. And this is something that I believe to be a completely insane decision because, as I see it, it doesn't matter who you choose to write the adventures of Ms. Marvel. We all continue to get the exact same result, which is poor sales for this book. Now, this Ms. Marvel title usually generates about 11 or 12,000 orders. And usually out of that 11 or 12,000 orders, this book usually goes on to get possibly about 4,000 or 5,000 sales at best. Because usually what book comic shops order is not what they sell, and oftentimes there are a lot of these books left over on the shelves of comic shops. But your Sana Amanat and your C.B. Cebulski still believe that they can make readers fans of this Kamala Kahn Ms. Marvel character, even though it's clear to me that there is no audience for this character, because in a country of over 300 million people, when you have a title that barely sells 5,000 and is barely ordered 11,000, that's when a publisher has to make the painful decision to pull the plug on the title and then start pursuing other books that are more profitable for the publishing imprint. Unfortunately, because Sana Amanat has an emotional connection to this Kamala Kahn Ms. Marvel character, because basically the character is an avatar for herself in the Marvel Universe and is a Mary Sue that represents her in the Marvel Universe, she vainly keeps this publication going in spite of it having no audience. And that shows that your Sana Amanat really is not really focused on improving the business of Marvel Comics or improving the quality of Marvel Comics, because when I take a critical look at this Kamala Kahn Ms. Marvel character, there isn't anything there for the reader to relate to or identify with. Now, oftentimes Marvel talks about Kamala Kahn saying that she is the first Muslim superhero and uses that as a marketing standpoint, but she's not a hero that most Muslims want to get behind. Now, Dust, who was a part of the X-Men back in the early 2000s, that was a character that a lot of Muslims got behind because it was a character that really reflected the Muslim culture and the Muslim community, and she dressed in a way that most Muslims related to and identified with and dealt with the struggles that most Muslims dealt with in their lives. However, Marvel, under Sana Amanat, does not want to push the Dust character because the Dust character does not reflect her narrative, nor does it reflect her politics. So she created this Kamala Kahn avatar character of herself and invested herself into the Marvel Universe. And she continues to push this character in spite of the character not having any sort of semblance of popularity. I mean, when your sales are at 5,000, it's clear that there is no real audience there, especially an audience that a large publisher like Marvel Comics can capitalize on. But that does not stop Sana Amanat from continuing to push this character on readers, because she believes that if she continues to push this character on readers. Eventually, the audience will connect with this character, and they will eventually start buying this character. Unfortunately, this character, again, has a very, very weak personality. She doesn't have much of a voice, because I've read many of these Ms. Marvel stories, and there's just not anything there. The stories are very shallow, the character is very flat, and the powers that this character has aren't something most girls want to have. I mean, a character who can grow parts of her body, that doesn't really look visually appealing to many girls. Many girls, they would rather have powers like I gave Isis and Easting, powers like flight, super strength, invulnerability, teleportation, cloaking where you can become invisible, and like in the case of Easting, magic powers, powers that they have seen in numerous forms of media, and again, powers they can relate to things in their everyday life. Moreover, they want to read stories featuring a heroine who has stories that are just like their everyday life. And after reading several of these Ms. Marvel stories, they just aren't relatable to any experience any girl has had, regardless of race or religion. The stories, again, they are very flat, they are very one-dimensional. There is no real antagonist for this Kamala Kahn to take on, and that really sucks the energy out of many of these Kamala Kahn stories, is that when you have this character, she never really faces any sort of obstacle, any sort of challenge, and she never has to persevere in the face of adversity. I mean, I read these Kamala Kahn stories, and they're very, again, they have nothing there as related to conflict. She never has to really deal with any sort of challenge or any sort of obstacle in any of her stories. In contrast, when I'm writing stories for characters like Isis and Easting, I am always putting these heroines in front of some sort of problem that they have to face in their personal lives, and some sort of problem as related to a villain that they confront. And usually because we see these characters overcoming these challenges in their personal lives and in their problems that's related to the bad guys, that's what allows us to connect with this character. That's what allows us to relate to this character, and that's what allows us to see this character as a person like ourselves. But I didn't see anything in many of the numerous Ms. Marvel books that created a character that I could see as someone that I could connect with, because she just has no, again, personality. She has no voice, and she just doesn't really come across as a three-dimensional person like many of the other comic book characters I've read over the years. Characters like Starfire, characters like Raven, the Wasp, characters like the Patsy Walker and Typhoid Mary. Many of those characters had endearing character traits, but your Kamala Kahn, she just doesn't have any sort of character traits. She just basically just there in the Marvel Universe to just be there, but she's not there to show us how she's going to overcome any sort of challenges. And that's something that a superhero has to do, is they have to overcome challenges. But the way G. Willow Wilson wrote your Ms. Marvel, she never really faced any challenges. She was basically there to represent what G. Willow Wilson, a white woman, saw the Muslim culture was about, but she never really tackled any sort of serious issues like racism, nor did she tackle any sort of issues as related to someone being Islamophobic or Kamala having to confront an Islamophobic person, nor did she have to encounter any sort of serious issues. And from what I've heard from several Muslims who once came to my blog, one guy said that he didn't really like this character because she did not wear hijab and she did not wear traditional Muslim attire. And that was one of the issues, that this is what a Muslim is telling me about this character, yet your son Amanat continues to push this character, not even listening to the audience. So they like Dust, but they don't like this Ms. Marvel. And when I look at this Ms. Marvel character, again, there's just nothing there that appeals to the reader. Now, this 5th edition is now being called The Magnificent Ms. Marvel, in a hopes of making it to be more like the old school Marvel comics like Invincible Iron Man, Amazing Spider-Man, and Incredible Hulk. Unfortunately, this Ms. Marvel has not done anything magnificent in the 5 volumes of her comic series. She has not developed a rogues gallery where she has a relationship with a series of villains. She has not really overcome any sort of serious obstacle or serious challenge in her life, and she has not really taken on any sort of serious issue in the pages of her comic, and that's one of the reasons why her comic is one of the poorest sellers at Marvel right now, because her comic really isn't about anything. There's nothing magnificent about Ms. Marvel, and she does nothing marvelous at all that enables the reader to want to pick up her issues, outside of a handful of comic YouTubers who just pick up her book to roast it. And I believe that's what's going to happen in the case of this book when they launched the 5th volume in 2019. The really big problem at Marvel Comics as related to this Ms. Marvel character is that Sana Amanat will not allow this character to become her own person. She will not allow her to overcome any sort of serious challenges. She will not allow her to overcome any sort of serious obstacles. She won't allow her to go through any sort of pain or any sort of loss or grow in any sort of way. And that's the big problem with this Ms. Marvel character, is that Sana Amanat is the one holding this character back and preventing her from being a great character. Now, when I created the John Haynes character, I created him partially based on myself, but as a writer, I realized I had to let that character be his own character, let him overcome numerous challenges, let him overcome obstacles, and let him become his own man. So I understood with the John Haynes character that in order for readers to relate to that character, identify with that character, and connect with that character, he had to become his own person. He had to fall down. He had to lose. He had to have losses. And it's those losses, it's that pain, it's those things that enable that character to grow. And it's from those hardships that enable readers to connect with that character and see that character as someone like themselves. And that's one of the reasons why so many readers like the John Haynes character, and they go out and pick up books like The Temptation of John Haynes, The Man Who Rules the World, the ISIS books like Bride of Dracula, Night of the Vampires, Escape from Transylvania, and the John Haynes book, A Conversation with Death. It's because they saw traits in the character that were relatable to them and relatable to their life experiences. So when I wrote the John Haynes character, I always made sure to take myself out of the situation and let the character be himself, let him tell his own stories, and also tell those stories that relate to the Black experience. So when I did stories like The Temptation of John Haynes, the first chapter of the first book, I talk about how hard it is for a Black man to keep a job in the face of not just racism, but this interclassism where you have these elite Black people who want to create these fiefdoms, because John loses his job due to one of these Black elitists in the first chapter. And as the book goes along, he runs into situations like racial profiling, and he runs into issues with Black women and other issues as related to life in the Black community. So I don't pull any punches in my stories as related to characters, because I understand that readers are going to learn from the development and the things that I go put the characters through, and it's that character development that allows people to see these characters as people like themselves. It's hard to see this Ms. Marvel as a person, because Sana Amanat, again, won't let the person that she created to represent herself in the Marvel Universe go through any sort of hardship. And she thinks that by relaunching this book 4 and 5 times, that eventually people are going to get worn down and just start going out to buy the book, and it will become popular that way. And that's a completely insane thing to think, because you can relaunch a book 5 or 10 times, but if the audience just isn't into it, they're just not into it. And when your audience has clearly shown that they have no interest in a book, as a publisher, you have to go and do the most painful thing a publisher has to do, and that's pull the plug on that book. Now, that's something I had to do back in about 2012 or 2013, when I had titles on the Lightning Source server. I had several of my books up there. I had All About Marilyn, The Original Temptation of John Haynes, and All About Nikki, and a couple of other books there. And I couldn't afford to keep those books in print because they weren't generating enough sales. So I had to go and make the painful decision to cancel my Lightning Source contract and let those books go from their original server on Lightning Source, and I had to let them go. And it was very painful because several of those books didn't do what I thought. When I first published All About Marilyn, it had like 7 or 8 sales, and it wasn't viable for me to keep that book in print on Lightning Source's server, so I had to cancel that book. All About Nikki, The Fabulous First Season, it sold an ebook, but it just didn't sell in paperback, so I had to cancel that book. And The Temptation of John Haynes, at the time, it wasn't really selling too well, so I had to cancel those books and discontinue those books. And it was a very painful decision I had to make, but I had to make the decision in order to keep my imprint going on a place like CreateSpace, because I had no choice but to take those books from there because they weren't selling, and I had to take a whole different approach to publishing. I know how painful it is to cancel a title, because as a writer, you put a lot of work into these books, you put a lot of work into these stories, you spend hours in front of the keyboard writing these stories, and you spend more time editing these stories. Moreover, a lot of times you get this emotional attachment to these characters, but if the audience just isn't there for this book, then you just have to make the tough decision to pull the plug. And I believe after 4 volumes, it's clear to me that there is no audience for this Kamala Kahn Ms Marvel. You can change the name, you can change the writer, but it's clear to me that it's the problem with this character. It has to do with the concept, and it has to do with the foundations of the character. She just is a person who nobody can connect with because she doesn't have any flaws. She's not someone you can relate to because she doesn't have any struggle. She's someone you can't identify with because her experience is not any experience most people know about on a human level. And to keep relaunching this exact same character and then continuing to expect big sales, it's just mind-boggling. Now, I heard somebody say that they are keeping this character in print for Scholastic, and that again is mind-bogglingly insane, because in publishing, we all know that Scholastic is a seller that oftentimes takes remainders, and they oftentimes deeply discount books at deeply discount prices. So you're basically taking a loss on anything as related to Ms. Marvel or Devil Dinosaur or whatever you put on Scholastic. So keeping this character in print on this brand, that's just mind-boggling, because it shows that you're just willing to take a loss on this character instead of just accepting that the audience just isn't there. As a publisher myself, I know how hard that is, but it's just something you have to do if you hope to keep your publishing imprint going. Is you have to cut excess titles. If a title just isn't pulling in the numbers, you have to let that book go. And it's clear to me that it's time for Marvel to just realize their attempt to try to push diversity with this Ms. Marvel character is a failure. They need to put a period at the end of this title and they need to move on to another character. Maybe it's time to do a Dust series if you want to represent a Muslim heroine, and if you want to give a story featuring a Muslim heroine a shot in the Marvel Universe. Because when it comes down to this Kamala Kahn Ms Marvel, her time is up. She's had too many opportunities, and it's just time for C.B. Cebulski and Sana Amanat to put a period at the end of things and just move on. If you'd like to try some of my books featuring strong heroines, like the ISIS series, the E-Steam series, the Spinsterella trilogy, and the Thetas, you may do so by clicking the link to Amazon.com in the description box. And if you want to want to help me make more videos like this, you can donate to my Patreon by clicking the link in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.